Welcome, everyone. Once again, welcome and good evening or good afternoon or good morning to you, whatever part of the world you are. It is lovely to be here together on a Tuesday with you. So this evening, I thought that we'd start with just tuning into our sense fields, sense spaces for a bit as a way to begin with the meditation as we usually do. And then probably about half an hour from now or so, we will transition to Dhamma talk and some Q&A. And so with that, we can just begin to sense the body sitting on your seat. Allowing all mental activity to just stream on by. And allowing the belly to relax. Sensing that natural stability of the body. And as best you can, allowing the back to come into alignment so that you're sitting upright. Relaxing the muscles of the chest and the ribs. Leaving plenty of room for the breath to breathe the body naturally. And softening the eyes, softening the mouth. What a treat to get to sit quietly. Just be right here. And now turning the attention to receive the sensations of touch in one hand. No need to strain in any way. Those sensations of touch are accessible just by observing. Just staying curious about those sensations of touch in the hand. Perhaps noticing whether the sensations of touch are shifting from moment to moment. allowing all other thoughts and sensations to recede into the background. Just observing the sensations of touch in the hand. And now a shift. Turn the attention toward sensations of hearing. Again, no need to strain at all. Just receiving the sensations of hearing. Perhaps they are very subtle. The sensations of hearing. Perhaps they're changing. Staying curious about sensations of hearing and allowing all other sensations to just recede. Just receiving sensations of sound from moment to moment. And now one more shift to attend to the sensations of thinking. Maybe this feels like sitting on the shore, looking out over the mind as the ocean, waves coming and going. Just observing mental activity. No need to change it or respond to it in any way. Thoughts as mere phenomena, just like a sound or a touch. Staying curious about mental phenomena, mental sensations. All right, that was our meditation practice for this evening. And feel free to adjust your posture, your camera, whatever you'd like to do as we move into the Dhamma talk for the evening. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Good evening again, everyone. Welcome. So this evening, I want to talk a little bit about finding your tribe. Finding your tribe. This is something that has been up, for a few years. Maybe some of you have heard of this phenomena of finding your tribe. It seems like there's more and more talk of that as we've come out of the pandemic or are coming out of the pandemic. More and more emphasis on that as a way of perhaps encouraging people to connect with one another and come out of some isolation. And, I was recently writing an article about this. There are at least a half a dozen books with tribe in the title right now. And, many, many articles. And there's an app, Find My Tribe app. Right. It's quite ironic, actually, if you think about the meaning of finding one's tribe, to think that you're going to do that by now. But what is it, right? What do we mean by finding your tribe, or what would your tribe be, right? So there's the literal kind of interpretation of finding your tribe, which is to connect with people in your immediate community, in the place where you live. Right? That's one way to think about it. There is your tribe in terms of race, in terms of white folks wanting to be hanging out together, or people of color wanting to spend time gathering together. There is tribe in terms of different kinds of hobbies, right? Like folks who are into reggaeton, or folks who are into bird watching, or folks who are into, science fiction novels, or whatever that is, right? Different kinds of interests. And all sorts of different ways to think about finding your tribe. And certainly there is some, I could say that it seems, in my experience anyway, that there's some validity to that the idea that we can gather together with folks who are like us in one way or another and find a sense of connection, find a sense of comfort in that, some ability to find a shared experience that is certainly true to some extent. So the example that I like to give about that is, I am a Latina. I'm a first-generation Latina. In fact, my father came over from Bogota, Colombia, when he was a very young man, came over here to go to school. And he married my mother, and very shortly thereafter, they met when they were quite young. And my mom is from Chattanooga, Tennessee. She's a Southern belle from Chattanooga. And so I tell people that my experience growing up was like I Love Lucy, like the TV show I Love Lucy. Like, there's the dad sort of spouting off in Spanish, blah, 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 blah. And there's the mom, and she even, had hair a little bit like Lucy's at one point in her life. And anyway, sort of, what's going on? And scheming about this, that, or the other thing. It was very much like that when I grew up. In fact, I thought everybody's household was like I Love Lucy because it was on TV. So it must be that that's what everybody was experiencing, right? So I didn't find out, of course, until my tween years when I started visiting my friends that no, my friends' households were not like that. But when I say that, right, so you all can laugh and you can have some shared experience around that. But when I say that to people who are also Latin folks, they totally, I mean, they get it in a way that's like, oh yeah, right, you know, that they can say, oh, you know, my household was like that too, or yeah, what was it like to have a raging father, you know, or that kind of communication issue in the house. Right, or different kinds of ways, or piñatas. Did you guys do piñatas? You know, sort of like celebratory stuff. So there are ways that I can feel a sense of connection and a sense of joy and a sense of you know, shared experience in that way. So that's one way for me to think about finding my own tribe, as an example. But what I want to say is that I also want to add that while there is this potential for some good to come out of it, I also feel that the idea of finding one's tribe is quite problematic. That if finding a group that you feel some affinity with means that you increase the sense of separation or the sense of differentiation between yourself and others, then that is bound to cause more suffering. By its nature, it is bound to cause more suffering. And in fact, I would suggest that many of the problems in the history of humanity, let alone right now, are related to this sense of tribalism, this sense of reinforcing the sense of separation, reinforcing the defenses around the way we think about our own identity. So in the example that I was giving, if I could only relate to Latin folks or to Latinas even, right? If I could only relate to that group of people, or if my sense of identification with that group of people became so strong that I felt alienated from other folks, then you can see that that would cause suffering for me. That would cause more of a sense of conflict in my life. Mm-hmm. And that sense of conflict then tends to reinforce even further the sense of separation, the sense of wanting a boundary, the sense of pushing away, the sense of there being a difference. Oh, no, that feels uncomfortable. Then I want that to go even further away. You see how that can spiral? So much so that eventually it can lead to even a sense of dehumanizing folks, not really seeing other people's humanity because of that sense of identification getting so strong that it wipes out the ability to identify with others who are outside the group, outside the tribe. In fact, again, I would say that this is something that we see play itself out constantly in humanity. This is the reason for wars and all kinds of land grabs. That failure to respect or that failure to acknowledge those folks as being part of your tribe. This is the reason, this is one of the reasonings, the forms of reasoning behind oppression and enslavement of other people. This is my tribe, and they're in a different tribe, and they're less than us. And therefore, they deserve to be treated as less than us. Or they could only have 2/3 of a vote. Do you remember that in American history? Did people get taught that in American history? Black folks could only have 2/3 of a vote. And I would suggest that that kind of difficulty is also behind much of what we see in terms of gun violence. So we see these mass shootings happening on a regular basis, on a nearly daily basis now. Yesterday, there was another one in Tennessee, in the state where my mom is from. Because that sense of alienation becomes so strong again that you cannot even see the humanity of those people. So this, I believe, is this kind of tribalism, this kind of identification with one's tribe, one's group, can very, very easily have a lot of negative consequences. But if we look very deeply, we look very closely at what's happening, then we see that when we do that, when we dehumanize others, or when we fail to see our connection with other people, then we also suffer. Yeah. The people who are the oppressors, they also feel embittered. They also feel that they are cut off somehow inwardly. They might not even know it, but they're suffering. They're suffering as a result, and they'll find out at some point. Find out at some point. So that kind of enslavement or oppression of other people is actually oppressing us. It's actually oppressing the oppressors, because they are caught up in this very vicious, very harmful cycle. Even if, in addition to the fact that from a standard, sort of Buddha Dhamma perspective, you can say that they're creating a lot of harmful karma for themselves, or creating a lot of harmful consequences for themselves in the future. Or the wars, right? So you go to war because you think that you deserve that piece of land, or you have to, you need those resources, or to hit back at somebody that you think did something to you. And yet, even if you can say that you won the war, so much has been lost. Lives, resources, buildings, culture, cultural treasures. So much is lost, even when you can say that you've won the war. And we see the other side of it too. If we continue to look closely, if we continue to observe how our lives really are, then we see also that we benefit when we connect with other people, when we include, when the more inclusive that we are, the more that we benefit personally from this. I tell people the best way to get a good night's sleep is to feel good about your role in the world. When you lie down in bed and you look back at what you did that day, if you can feel good about your day, then you will get a good night's sleep. You will be able to be at ease with your contribution. Or we see that when we lift other people up out of enslavement, out of oppression, out of poverty, that also lifts us up, that we feel good about that. That we feel we can connect with something, some compassion in our hearts. So there are many ways that we can start to see the truth of interconnection in very mundane situations. And then perhaps also begin to investigate the function of karma that's involved there. How is it that that our intentional actions actually show up as future results? But I want to give another example. So I gave the example of my personal upbringing. But there's another beautiful example of this. There was a book. I haven't actually even gone through the book yet. I was just reading an article about it. But there's a situation in which, and I've told a bit of this story before, I believe, on that Tuesday night. There's a rabbi named Michael Weiser and his wife, his then wife, Julie. And they had moved out to Nebraska to get away from anti-Semitism. I thought that would be a good place where they would have fewer problems with their Jewish faith. And so they moved out to Omaha. And it turns out that right away, very shortly after they arrived there, they started to be harassed because one person who happened to live in Omaha, Nebraska, was Larry Trapp. Larry Trapp was the grand dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, in that part of the country. And he lived in that town, and he heard that the Weisers had come. And so they started to receive these really threatening phone calls and threatening mail. And rather than decide that they were just going to move away again, or decide to try to meet that hostility with equal hostility, then what did they do? They did the opposite. They included this person in their tribe. So Michael Weiser, Rabbi Weiser, would call up Larry Trapp and say, "Hey, Larry, there's a lot of love out there and you're not getting any of it. Don't you want some?" Right? And so this is like love harassment. And eventually what happened was that they learned that Larry was in a wheelchair, that he had some kind of health condition that resulted in him not being able to walk. And so he lived in a wheelchair. And so one day they called up and said, "Hey, you know what, Larry, we'd like to take you to the grocery store. We'd like to help you get some groceries because we know that's hard for you to get to the grocery store. That's what we've heard." And they made the offer a couple of times, and finally he said yes. So Larry Trapp said, "Yes, we could go to the grocery store." And then after going to the grocery store a few times, what happened? The Grand Dragon invited the Weisers over for dinner to his house. Right? Makes sense. We went out, we got the groceries together. At some point, he said, "Oh, come over to my place for dinner." Trying to convince them of his view of the world. Right? Still, they weren't buddies yet. And in fact, when the Weisers got over to Larry Trapp's house, they found that he had, images of Hitler up on the walls and all kinds of, flags and slogans and stuff around the house, racist emblems and things around the house. But, they stayed friendly with him no matter what. They stayed friendly. And they kept talking to him. And then one day, Larry Trapp called Rabbi Weiser. And the only thing he said was, I want to stop what I'm doing and I don't know how. And Michael Weiser said it was a chilling moment. It was even though, they had been working at trying to turn him around in some way, in that moment, it was a shock. Because then this is not what Rabbi Weiser said, but what I interpret is, then he, in that moment, is faced with, are you really willing to make this person part of your tribe now? Are you really willing to be human beings together and help each other out? And ultimately, the answer was yes. In fact, they became such good friends that Larry Trapp left the KKK. He wrote letters to all of his former followers and said, I'm sorry, what I did was wrong. You all should stop hating people. He wrote letters of apology to the Weisers and to the other people he had harassed. He eventually, even at one point, his health got really bad and he lived with the Weisers for a short period of time. So this was a beautiful, beautiful way of exactly that. Going beyond this sense of tribalism to really see each other's humanity. And these kinds of stories are happening all the time, these kinds of stories. We might not hear as much about them as we hear about the wars or the gun violence or other things. But they are also happening. And they are happening because people are willing to open their hearts. People are willing to see compassion in each other's eyes. And so to bring it full circle back to Buddhism, I would say that the reason why the Buddha, one of the reasons why the Buddha emphasized these practices called the Brahma viharas, the heavenly dwellings, or the divine abodes. One of the reasons he taught that so much, especially to people who were new to the practice, is because it is a way of beginning to do exactly that, is a way of beginning to open your heart and mind to sharing kindness, to sharing compassion, to sharing a wish for mutual wholesome joy, to sharing a sense of stability and steadiness completely. That there is no being outside of your tribe, not just humans even. There is no being outside of your tribe. And the way that the Buddha taught this kind of practice, this kind of meditation, is there are several different ways, but the meditative part of it is really beautiful because it doesn't ask you to actually have to one by one go and make friends like the Weisers did with Larry Trapp. It doesn't ask you that. It asks you to expand your mind, to know the limitless mind, and to fill that limitless mind with this beautiful quality so that becomes that infuses it. And when the moments come, then that will be present, that compassion. And this is true not just of early Buddhism either. Compassion is also a very, very big theme in the Mahayana, for example. Yeah? We put a face on compassion in the Mahayana. Her name is Kuan Yin or Kanon or Avalokiteshvara. And she's understood to be this very powerful being that shows up in all kinds of difficult circumstances. So whether you believe in beings like that or not, that quality of compassion is very powerful. It can change people's minds. It can move people away from hate and violence, from war and sheer indifference, and move us toward a truer understanding, a more real understanding of how it is that we live. If it were not for compassion, we would have wiped ourselves off the planet a long time ago. And all sorts of other creatures while we're at it. But there has been enough. There has been enough compassion for us to be here doing this practice, living this life. So in that way, we can show our gratitude as well by sharing compassion as best we can, as best as our hearts and minds will let us. And knowing that it may be useful, it may be very helpful to spend time with people who are like you. You know, we do this even within the Sangha. We have affinity groups, different kinds of affinity groups, right? We have the Alphabet Sangha, LGBTQIA+, and other sorts of letters that seem to be evolving beautifully. And we have the BIPOC Sangha, we have the Sangha of Black, Indigenous people of color, and we have Sanghas that come together around language. I feel very fortunate and very grateful as a person of mixed race to be able to be together with different groups that are Spanish-speaking groups and offering the Dhamma in Spanish. And like that, it can be very helpful, but just don't let it. We could just have to be careful not to let it increase our sense of separation, because our sense of separation is truly a delusion. It is truly, truly a delusion. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention this evening.